Ethan was washing the last dinner plate when Melissa quietly entered the kitchen. He didn't look up at first, not until he noticed the tremor in her breathing. She set her wine glass on the counter with a soft click, the kind that sounds harmless but announces trouble. Then she said it, calm, rehearsed, merciless. "I want an open marriage. If you don't agree, I'll file for divorce." The words cut through the room like cracked ice. Ethan froze, water running over his hands, too warm compared to the cold settling in his chest. Melissa continued, explaining she had already met with a lawyer, already learned how the assets would be divided, already decided the direction of their future without him. It wasn't a conversation. It wasn't even a plea. It was a verdict. Ethan dried his hands slowly, turned to face her, and managed a steady breath. "Okay," he said. Ethan woke the next morning with a strange stillness in his chest. The house felt different, as if the air itself remembered the ultimatum Melissa had delivered the night before. He made coffee in silence, half expecting her to walk in and say she didn't mean it, that it was anger or confusion or anything other than intent. But when she finally came downstairs, she looked composed, almost relieved, as if speaking her desire out loud had freed her. She sat across from him and folded her hands neatly. There was no apology waiting. Only explanation. She told him she had been thinking about the open marriage option for months. She said she loved him but felt restricted, like life was passing her by and she needed new experiences to feel alive again. Ethan listened quietly, even when the explanation started to twist into something unfamiliar. Then her voice softened, and she admitted the truth she had been circling around. "There's someone," she said. The words hit harder than the ultimatum. She didn't hesitate, she didn't stumble. His name was Tyler, a trainer at the CrossFit gym she had recently joined. She was quick to insist she hadn't cheated, that nothing physical had happened, that it was only chemistry and connection and curiosity. She said those words carefully, almost proudly, as if they cleansed the situation. But to Ethan, her honesty felt like a blade slid between the ribs with practiced precision. Melissa went on, explaining that she wanted to explore things with Tyler, ethically, that an open marriage made everything transparent instead of secretive. She framed it like a responsible choice, like she was doing him a favor by telling him up front. Ethan studied her, realizing that she wasn't asking. She had already made peace with the idea, already imagined her new life with another man in it. She just needed Ethan to comply. He asked her why she didn't file for divorce if she wanted someone else. She looked at him with a mixture of irritation and fear. "Because I don't want to lose us," she said. "I want both." The simplicity of the answer stunned him. She wanted the stability of marriage and the thrill of something new. And in her mind, those two things could exist without conflict as long as she labeled them correctly. Ethan realized then that the conversation wasn't about openness or emotional honesty. It was about justification. And Melissa had already justified everything. She talked about freedom, about self-discovery, about how modern relationships shouldn't be confined to old rules. Every sentence sounded like something she had practiced, maybe in front of a mirror or after long talks with someone who encouraged her fantasies. Probably Tyler. Ethan remained still. He didn't raise his voice, didn't accuse her, didn't beg. He only watched her outline a future she expected him to accept without questioning. When she finished, she gave him a hopeful smile, as if expecting gratitude for her transparency. But Ethan only nodded once, slow and deliberate. For the first time, Melissa's confidence flickered, but she didn't understand why. Not yet. Ethan already knew this wasn't a request. It was a declaration. And declarations always have consequences. Ethan spent the next 2 days pretending to process everything Melissa had said. He moved quietly, answered her casually, and allowed her to believe he was slowly warming to the idea she had forced upon him. Melissa seemed lighter, almost cheerful, as if her confession had lifted a weight from her shoulders. She talked more openly about ethical non-monogamy, quoting articles, podcasts, and stories from people who claimed it strengthened their marriages. Ethan listened without reacting, storing every word away like ammunition he might need later. He already knew what he would do. He just needed time to execute it. Ethan didn't mention the contract again after Melissa finally signed it. He simply folded the papers, placed them in a locked drawer in his office, and carried on with his routine as if nothing had changed. Melissa tried to act normal as well, but Ethan could see the tension behind her smile, the way she avoided eye contact whenever the topic drifted too close to the new arrangement. She had wanted freedom without structure. Now she had freedom with responsibility, and the responsibility bothered her more than she expected. Ethan began exploring his side of the agreement with quiet efficiency. He wasn't impulsive or reckless. He didn't rush into anything out of spite. Instead, he signed up for a reputable dating service, one known for handling people who valued discretion and emotional maturity. Within a week, he received messages from women who appreciated honesty, stability, and direct communication. Women who weren't looking for chaos disguised as liberation. Women very different from the version of Melissa he had learned to navigate. He approached each conversation calmly, focusing on compatibility and clear boundaries. Soon, he matched with Sophie, a marketing consultant with an easy laugh and a grounded presence. They talked for hours without the awkwardness or strain that had recently filled his conversations with Melissa. Sophie asked about the open marriage with genuine curiosity, not judgment, and Ethan was surprised at how natural it felt to be heard by someone again. They agreed to meet for coffee, and the connection only deepened. It was simple, warm, and free of the emotional turbulence that had become normal in his home life. Meanwhile, Melissa discovered the reality of dating outside marriage was far more brutal than the fantasy. Her first few matches were men who immediately tested boundaries. Some married themselves, some clearly uninterested in anything except convenience. She tried to convince herself it was just bad luck. But the pattern continued. One man ghosted her after 2 dates. Another criticized her for being too emotionally attached. A third asked if she could help pay for his hotel room. Every experience chipped away at the confident version of herself she had projected when she first demanded the open marriage. Ethan noticed the subtle changes. She came home quieter. Her gym sessions grew longer, as if she was chasing validation in reps and sweat. She checked her phone anxiously, hopping for replies that never came. Sometimes she asked Ethan how his week was going, trying to sound casual, but her voice carried a tightness he couldn't ignore. When Melissa found out Ethan was seeing someone consistently, the shift in her demeanor was unmistakable. Her cheerfulness evaporated. Her smiles grew forced. She asked more questions: how often he went out, whether he enjoyed her company, whether he felt connected. Ethan answered honestly, but without elaboration. He didn't boast. He didn't hide. He simply lived within the rules she had created and agreed to. Melissa tried going on more dates, but the results didn't improve. The men sensed her desperation or used her situation to manipulate her. She felt embarrassed, disrespected, and increasingly bitter. The fantasy she once cherished now felt like a trap of her own making. The more Ethan thrived, the more Melissa stumbled. And for the first time since the ultimatum, she began to realize the imbalance. She had expected Ethan to struggle. She had expected herself to flourish. But reality rarely followed the script she wrote in her head. And deep down, though she refused to admit it, she knew she had set in motion something she could no longer control. Melissa's frustration grew slowly at first, like a hairline crack running along the surface of something she once believed was unbreakable. She tried to ignore it, tried to reassure herself that Ethan's early success was just a coincidence, that she only needed time to find her rhythm. But the more she pushed forward, the more reality refused to bend to her expectations. She continued dating, hopping from coffee shops to noisy bars, trying to replicate the excitement she imagined she'd feel with Tyler. But every encounter felt hollow. One man bragged about his conquests the entire evening. Another admitted he liked married women because they don't get attached. A younger guy flirted with her endlessly, but disappeared the moment she mentioned boundaries. Melissa found herself coming home drained, embarrassed, and angrier than she wanted to admit. And then there was Ethan. Calm, steady, and infuriatingly happy. He didn't hide his life. He didn't boast. But the simplicity of his peace gnawed at her. When he mentioned he had gone hiking with Sophie, Melissa felt a sting she hadn't prepared for. When he casually told her they were planning a wine tasting the following weekend, her stomach tightened. It wasn't supposed to be like this. In her imagination, Ethan would be awkward, uncertain, hesitant. She thought she would be the one glowing with possibility. But instead, she watched him grow more confident, more relaxed, as if the weight of their fractured marriage had lifted from his shoulders. Melissa began checking his schedule more often. She asked questions she pretended were casual but carried a sharp edge. Did you stay out late? Did she come over? Are you two getting serious? Ethan answered truthfully, but always with the same even tone that made her feel as if she had no right to react. After all, she was the one who had asked for this. Her jealousy soon spilled over into the rest of her life. At the gym, she became snappish, irritated when others got attention she used to enjoy. She snapped at coworkers, forgot meetings, and once raised her voice during a team call. Her supervisor asked if everything was all right, but Melissa brushed it off with a forced smile. The pressure inside her kept tightening, like a valve she didn't know how to release. The breaking point came one night after Ethan returned from a date. He walked into the house humming softly, the kind of quiet contentment she hadn't seen from him in years. Melissa was sitting on the couch, pretending to read, but the tension in her shoulders was unmistakable. When he gently told her he and Sophie were becoming close, something inside Melissa snapped. She accused him of moving too fast, of being insensitive, of disrespecting their marriage. Ethan listened, without raising his voice. Then he reminded her, calmly, that every part of this arrangement had been her idea. And every rule in place was one she had agreed to. She had no ground to stand on. That night, Melissa barely slept. She tossed and turned, replaying every moment that had led them here. By morning, she was exhausted, defeated, and desperate for control she no longer had. She approached Ethan in the kitchen, voice trembling despite her attempt to appear composed. "I want to close the marriage," she said. "I want things to go back to how they were." Ethan's expression didn't soften. He didn't comfort her. He simply reminded her of the contract she had signed. The clause stating that, if she chose to close the open marriage, she forfeited the protections she thought she could rely on. Melissa felt the world tilt beneath her. For the first time, she understood the trap was real. And it was built entirely from the bricks she had handed to him herself. Melissa moved through the days that followed like someone walking through fog. She couldn't think straight, couldn't focus, couldn't accept that the situation she once believed she controlled was now slipping through her fingers. And the more Ethan seemed unaffected, the more frantic she became. It started with small attempts to regain ground, the kind of emotional maneuvers she used to rely on during minor arguments. She called Ethan's mother late one evening, speaking in a trembling voice about how distant he had become, implying he was abandoning the marriage. But his mother, already aware of the contract and the circumstances, responded coldly. She reminded Melissa that choices have consequences and ended the call without offering the sympathy Melissa expected. The rejection shook her. Ethan waited longer than he needed to before bringing the divorce agreement to Melissa. He wasn't punishing her. He simply wanted to be absolutely certain She understood the gravity of what had unfolded. And when he finally approached her, he did it with the same calm certainty he had carried since the moment she handed him the ultimatum. Melissa was sitting at the dining table, staring blankly at a cup of untouched tea. Her shoulders slumped when she saw the folder in his hands. She didn't ask what it was. She knew. He placed it gently in front of her and sat down across from her. His voice was even, almost quiet. "I think it's time we end this," he said. No anger. No spite. Just the admission of a truth that had been looming between them for weeks. Melissa's lips trembled. She opened the folder with shaking fingers, scanning the pages through a blur of tears. The terms were firm but not cruel. Ethan hadn't pursued the maximum leverage he could have claimed under the contract. He wasn't stripping her of everything. He was simply securing his own stability and closing a chapter he no longer had the strength to salvage. "This is better than I deserve," she whispered. Ethan didn't disagree. He only nodded. She asked him if they could try counseling. He told her they had passed the point where counseling could rebuild what she had willingly torn apart. She asked if they could slow down, think it through, take a break instead. He reminded her gently that she had made her decision long before he ever took action. He was just giving shape to the consequences she had already chosen. For a moment, Melissa tried to bargain. She promised she would work on herself. She promised she would stay off dating apps, quit the gym, cut ties with Tyler, rebuild trust. But Ethan saw through the desperation. He saw a woman clinging to the last scraps of something she didn't appreciate until it was slipping away. "I'm not doing this to punish you," he said softly. "I'm doing it because the version of our marriage you wanted isn't one I can live in." Melissa cried through most of the signing process. Her hand shook so violently, she had to stop twice to steady her breath. Ethan watched, not coldly, but with a distant sorrow for what they had once been, before demands and fantasy and selfishness twisted everything out of shape. When it was finally done, she pushed the papers back across the table and whispered, "I never thought it would end like this." Ethan replied, "Neither did I." But the honesty in his voice carried a strange peace. A peace that Melissa no longer had access to. In the weeks that followed, their paths diverged sharply. Melissa moved into a small apartment, her finances stretched thin. She tried dating again, but every encounter reminded her of what she had lost: stability, trust, partnership, a man who once would have given her anything. She struggled with loneliness, replaying her choices over and over until regret became a constant companion. Ethan, on the other hand, quietly rebuilt. He bought a modest house in a calm neighborhood, started cooking again, went on long walks without tension weighing on his chest. Sophie moved on respectfully, understanding he needed time. And months later, Ethan met Caroline, a woman who brought steadiness without complication, warmth without demands. Their connection grew gently, without turmoil or power struggles. Ethan didn't brag. He didn't gloat. He simply lived. And Melissa watched from a distance as the life she thought she controlled slipped from her grasp and settled into Ethan's hands instead. In the end, Ethan recognized a simple truth. The marriage hadn't ended because of an open arrangement. It ended because Melissa had built their future on an ultimatum and expected him to accept a life that never once considered him. He walked forward with clarity. She walked forward with regret. And the balance between them shifted forever. In the months that followed, life settled into a quiet rhythm that felt strangely new, yet undeniably right for Ethan. He no longer woke with the tightness in his chest that had once defined his mornings. His home felt peaceful, uncluttered by tension or the unspoken fear of being asked to become smaller for someone else's comfort. He learned to appreciate silence again, not as a void, but as a space where he could finally breathe. Melissa, living her separate life, occasionally glimpsed him from afar, online, through mutual friends, in passing moments of coincidence, and each time she felt a familiar ache. She realized too late that stability wasn't something guaranteed. It was something nurtured, respected, and protected. Regret followed her like a shadow she could never quite outrun. Ethan didn't hate her. He simply no longer belonged to the version of their life she had tried to create. He carried forward only what was worth keeping: the lessons, the clarity, the renewed sense of self. And as he walked into a future shaped by his own choices, he understood that endings were not failures. They were turning points. And this one had finally given him the freedom to begin again.